I stood in my driveway at 6 in the morning, watching the plow truck I'd hired disappear around the corner of Maple Ridge Lane, and felt pretty damn satisfied with myself for being proactive about the snowstorm that had dumped 18 inches on our neighborhood in Lakewood, Colorado, overnight. Little did I know that clearing my driveway would turn into a months-long battle that would expose corruption I never could have imagined. My name is Owen Richardson, and I'd lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 3 years. It was one of those planned communities where every house looked vaguely similar, painted in approved earth tones, with strict rules about everything from mailbox height to Christmas decoration timelines. I'd bought the place after my divorce, thinking a fresh start in a nice neighborhood would be good for me. The HOA seemed reasonable enough during the home buying process, just some basic rules to keep property values up. That morning, I was dressed in my work clothes, ready to head to my job as an electrical contractor, when I noticed a white sedan pulling up to my driveway. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Patricia Burton, the HOA president, a woman in her late 40s with the kind of blonde, highlighted hair that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager," from a mile away. She got out of her car wearing a puffy white jacket and boots that clearly had never seen actual snow before today, picking her way carefully across the cleared pavement of my driveway like she was navigating a minefield. "Mr. Richardson," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone that made my stomach sink. "We need to talk about this." I walked toward her, my coffee still steaming in my hand. "Morning, Patricia." "About what?" She gestured broadly at my driveway and the area around it. "About this disaster you've created. Do you see these ruts? Your plow driver has completely destroyed the landscaping edge and created significant damage to the common area grass." I looked where she was pointing. Sure, there were some tire tracks where the plow had backed up and maneuvered, and maybe the edge where my driveway met the grass strip wasn't perfectly pristine, but calling it destroyed seemed like a massive exaggeration. The ground was frozen solid and covered in snow. "How could anyone even tell? Patricia, it just snowed 18 inches last night. I had to get my driveway cleared for work. Those are just tire tracks in the snow." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures, crouching down dramatically to get close-ups of the tire impressions in the snow-covered grass. "These are violations of Section 7.3 of the HOA guidelines. All snow removal must be done in a manner that doesn't damage common areas or create unsightly conditions. I'm documenting this for the board meeting." "The snow just stopped falling 3 hours ago," I said, trying to keep my voice level. How exactly was I supposed to clear my driveway without any equipment touching the ground? "That's not my problem, Mr. Richardson. You should have considered that before hiring an outside contractor without HOA approval. All contractors must be pre-approved per Section 12.1. I felt my jaw clench. I've never heard of needing approval for a snow plow. That's not in the guidelines I received when I bought the house. The guidelines were updated 6 months ago. All homeowners received notification via email." She stood up, brushing snow off her knees with an expression of deep satisfaction. "You'll be receiving a formal violation notice within 72 hours. The fine starts at $200 and increases by $50 per day until the damage is remediate." Remediate? It's winter. "The ground is frozen. What exactly am I supposed to remediate?" Patricia gave me a tight smile. "Again, not my problem. Perhaps you should have thought of that before taking unauthorized action. Have a good day, Mr. Richardson." She picked her way back to her car, and I stood there in disbelief, watching her drive away. The whole interaction had taken maybe 5 minutes, but I already knew this was going to be a nightmare. When I got home from work that evening, I found the violation notice stuck to my front door in a plastic sleeve. It was 3 pages long, printed on official-looking HOA letterhead with color photos of my driveway. The photos showed the tire tracks in the snow, with close-ups that made them look far worse than they actually were. The notice cited multiple violations and demanded immediate remediation with a deadline of 7 days, despite just telling me I'd have 72 hours to receive it. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the whole thing twice. The fine structure was even worse than Patricia had mentioned. $200 initial fine, plus $50 per day, plus a mandatory remediation oversight fee of $150, plus potential emergency landscaping assessment costs if I didn't fix it myself to their satisfaction. The next morning, I went outside to actually look at what they were complaining about. The sun was out, and some of the snow had started to melt. I crouched down where the plow had created the ruts they were so concerned about. Honestly, I couldn't see any actual damage to anything. The grass was dormant for winter anyway, and the strips along the driveway were barely visible under the remaining snow. The tire impressions were already starting to fill in as snow melted and shifted. That's when I noticed something interesting. The landscaping along the common areas, the parts that the HOA itself was responsible for maintaining, looked terrible. Not winter dormant terrible, but genuinely damaged and neglected terrible. I walked along the sidewalk in front of my house and the neighboring properties, really looking at the HOA-maintained spaces for the first time in months. The ornamental shrubs that lined the entrance to our subdivision were broken and dying. Several had large branches snapped off, and I could see where heavy equipment had clearly driven over the planted areas, leaving actual ruts in the ground, not just snow impressions. The pine bark mulch that was supposed to cover these beds was scattered everywhere, and in some places, completely missing. The decorative boulders that marked the corners of the common areas had deep gouges in the ground around them, like something heavy had repeatedly struck them or scraped against them. The sign for Meadowbrook Estates at the main entrance had landscaping around its base that looked like it had been run over multiple times. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. If they wanted to play the documentation game, I could play it too. Over the next week, I walked through the entire subdivision during my lunch breaks and in the evenings, documenting every instance of landscaping damage in the common areas. What I found was actually shocking. The HOA had hired some landscaping company that was clearly doing substandard work. There were tire ruts everywhere in the planted beds, broken sprinkler heads sticking up out of the ground, damaged trees with bark scraped off by equipment, and areas where it looked like someone had just dumped loads of dirt or mulch without spreading it properly. I took hundreds of photos, making sure to capture timestamps and locations. I noticed that much of the worst damage was fresh, probably from within the last few months. Some of it had clearly been there since before the snow, and some of it looked like it happened during snow removal operations by whatever company the HOA had hired. The violation deadline came and went. I didn't remediate anything because there was nothing to remediate. The snow had melted naturally, and the grass underneath looked exactly the same as every other patch of grass in the neighborhood, dormant, brown, and waiting for spring. 2 days after the deadline, I received another notice. This one informed me that my fine was now $600, the initial $200 plus $50 for each of 8 days. The math didn't even make sense because it hadn't been 8 days, but apparently they were counting weekends differently or something. I decided it was time to go on the offensive. I compiled all my photos into a detailed report, organized by location and type of damage. I wrote up descriptions of each issue, referencing the same HOA guidelines they'd cited in my violation notice. Turns out, Section 8.7 required all landscaping to be maintained in a neat and attractive manner consistent with community standards. Section 9.2 required contractors to avoid damage to common areas and remediate any damage within 30 days. The HOA's own landscaping contractor had violated these rules dozens of times over, based on my documentation. Some of the damage was months old. I printed out copies of my report and requested a hearing before the HOA board, which was my right according to the bylaws. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later on a Tuesday evening at the community center. In the meantime, I got another violation notice. This one claimed I had failed to address previous violations and added an additional $500 fine, bringing my total to $1,100. They also threatened to place a lien on my property if the fines weren't paid within 30 days. I called a lawyer friend of mine, Marcus Chen, who specialized in real estate law. We met for coffee at a place near his office in Denver. HOA disputes are tricky, Marcus told me, stirring sugar into his espresso. They have a lot of power, but they also have to follow their own rules and state law. From what you're telling me, they're not following proper procedures. The fine structure seems excessive, and if they're not maintaining common areas while fining you for alleged damage, that's definitely something you can fight. How hard is it going to be? I asked. Depends how reasonable they are. If you present your evidence at the hearing and they're willing to drop this, great. If not, you might need to take legal action. I'd recommend recording the hearing if Colorado law allows it, which it does as long as one party consents and you're a party. They're not going to like that. Marcus grinned. They don't have to like it. They have to follow the law. Document everything, stay calm, and don't let them bully you. From what you've described, Patricia Burton sounds like she's on a power trip. Those types usually back down when someone actually stands up to them with facts. The night of the hearing, I showed up at the community center with a briefcase containing printed copies of my entire report, my laptop with digital copies, and a small digital recorder that I placed obviously on the table in front of me when I sat down. The HOA board consisted of 5 people. Patricia Burton sat in the middle, flanked by 4 others I recognized from the neighborhood but didn't know well. There was an older man named Gerald who always wore a suit even though he was retired. A younger woman named Cynthia who worked from home and seemed perpetually stressed. Another middle-aged woman named Donna, who I'd never actually spoken to. And a guy about my age named Brad who coached Little League and generally seemed reasonable. About 15 other homeowners sat in the audience. I was apparently not the only person with grievances that evening. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately pointed at my recorder. "You can't record this meeting." "Actually, I can," I said calmly. Colorado is a one-party consent state and I'm a party to this proceeding. I'm recording for my records, as is my legal right. Her face flushed red. This is a private HOA matter, which I'm a part of, which makes me a party to it. The recording stays. Gerald leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She looked like she wanted to argue more but finally said, "Fine. But it cannot be shared publicly without board approval." That wasn't actually true, but I decided not to push it. I just needed the recording for documentation. "Let's proceed with Mr. Richardson's hearing regarding violations of Sections 7.3 and 12.1, Patricia said, reading from a paper in front of her. Mr. Richardson hired an unauthorized contractor who caused significant damage to common area landscaping through improper snow removal. Despite being notified of the violation, he has refused to remediate the damage and has now accrued $1,100 in fines. That's not accurate, I said. May I present my response? You have 10 minutes, Patricia said, crossing her arms. I opened my laptop and pulled up my photo documentation. First, I'd like to address the alleged damage. These photos show my driveway area on the day I received the violation notice, 3 days after the snow removal, and then 1 week after. As you can see, there is no actual damage to any landscaping. The ruts mentioned in the violation were temporary impressions in snow, which melted naturally. I clicked through the photos on my laptop, which was connected to my monitor so they could see. Patricia's expression got tighter with each image. Second, I'd like to address the claim that I hired an unauthorized contractor. I was never informed that snow removal contractors required pre-approval. The updated guidelines mentioned were never sent to me, and I've checked my email thoroughly. I've printed out my email history for the past year related to HOA communications. I slid a stack of papers across the table. As you can see, no such notification appears. Cynthia picked up the papers and started looking through them. Patricia tried to grab them from her, but Cynthia held on. Third, and most importantly, I'd like to present evidence of actual landscaping damage in our common areas that violates the same sections you've cited in my violation notice. I pulled out my compiled report and slid copies to each board member. Then I started clicking through photos on my laptop, showing the damaged shrubs, the ruts in planting beds, the broken sprinkler heads, the scraped trees. These photos show systematic damage to HOA-maintained areas caused by the landscaping contractor the board hired. Some of this damage is months old and hasn't been remediated, which violates Section 9.2 of our guidelines. The ruts and equipment damage visible in these photos far exceed anything allegedly caused by my snow removal. The room had gotten very quiet. Several of the homeowners in the audience had stood up to see my laptop screen better. Furthermore, I continued, the fine structure being applied to my situation appears to violate our HOA bylaws. Article 15, Section 3 states that fines must be reasonable and proportional to the violation. I'm being charged escalating daily fees for damage that doesn't exist, while the HOA itself has failed to maintain common areas for months. Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. Those are completely different situations. The landscaping contractor has been dealing with difficult conditions. Difficult conditions like snow, I asked. Because that's what I was dealing with too. Yet I'm being fined and they're not being held accountable. Brad, the Little League coach, spoke up for the first time. Patricia, I've got to say, I've noticed some of this damage too. The area near my house has been looking pretty rough. When was the last time we did a walkthrough inspection of the contractor's work? That's not relevant to this hearing, Patricia snapped. Actually, it is, Cynthia said, still looking through my email printouts. If we're holding residents to a standard, we need to hold our contractors to the same standard. And I don't see any email about updated guidelines here either. When were those supposedly sent? Patricia shuffled papers. I'd need to check the exact date. Because we should have records of that, Gerald said, looking uncomfortable. All official communications are supposed to be documented. The hearing devolved from there. Several audience members started asking questions about other HOA maintenance issues. Someone brought up the pool that had been under repair for 6 months. Another person asked about missing funds from the annual budget. Patricia tried to regain control but was clearly flustered. Finally, she called for the board to vote on my violation in a private session. No, I said firmly. According to the bylaws, voting on violation penalties must be done in open session unless it involves personnel matters. This is about property maintenance, so it's open session. Gerald nodded. He's right, Patricia. We need to vote now. Patricia looked like she wanted to flip the table. Fine. All in favor of upholding the violation and fine. Only Patricia and Donna raised their hands. All opposed. Gerald, Cynthia, and Brad raised their hands. The violation is overturned, Gerald said. The fine is waived. Mr. Richardson, thank you for bringing the landscaping issues to our attention. We'll be addressing those with the contractor. Patricia stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received a new violation notice. This one claimed my house number wasn't properly visible from the street, violating Section 4.2. It came with a $200 fine. I looked at my house numbers. They were exactly the same as they'd been since I bought the house 3 years ago. 4-inch brass numbers, clearly visible, properly maintained. I took photos from multiple angles showing how visible they were. The next week, another violation. This one said my trash cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. I had security camera footage showing that I'd put them away within an hour of collection, which was within the allowed time frame. Then another violation. And another. Patricia was clearly retaliating, trying to bury me in paperwork and fines. Over the next month, I received 9 different violation notices for increasingly petty things. My doormat was allegedly the wrong color. My car was supposedly parked too far from the curb. A package left on my porch for 3 hours was an unsightly obstruction. Each violation came with a $200 fine. If she was trying to harass me into moving, she was doing a good job of making my life miserable. But I documented everything. Every violation, I responded to with photos, timestamps, and references to the actual HOA guidelines. I saved every piece of correspondence. I kept detailed notes of every interaction. I also continued documenting the landscaping issues, which were getting worse. In March, when spring started to arrive and the ground thawed, the extent of the damage became even more obvious. The HOA's landscaping contractor, a company called Greenscape Solutions, had absolutely destroyed multiple areas with their equipment. Deep ruts from heavy machinery, broken irrigation lines that were now flooding areas, plants that should have been coming back to life, but were clearly dead from having been driven over repeatedly. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board about the landscaping, including a detailed cost estimate from a reputable landscaping company I'd consulted with. The damage totaled somewhere around $15,000 in needed repairs and replacements. The response came from Patricia personally. My complaint was noted, but required no action because the contractor was working within normal parameters of seasonal maintenance. That's when I started digging deeper into the HOA's finances. As a homeowner, I had the right to review the association's financial records. I submitted a formal written request. Patricia denied it, claiming I needed to specify what documents I wanted to see. I submitted another request, this time listing specific items: all contracts with Greenscape Solutions, payment records for the past 2 years, budget reports, and board meeting minutes. She denied it again, this time claiming I needed to provide a legitimate purpose for the review. I called Marcus again. She's violating Colorado law, he told me. The HOA has to provide financial records to homeowners who request them. There's a specific statute about it. Give me a few days. I'll draft a formal demand letter. Marcus sent the demand letter on his law firm letterhead. It cited the specific Colorado statute and gave the HOA 7 days to comply or face legal action. 5 days later, I received an email with PDF attachments. Several of the files were corrupted and wouldn't open. Others were scanned so poorly they were barely readable. But what I could read was very interesting. The HOA had signed a contract with Greenscape Solutions 2 years ago. The contract was for standard landscaping maintenance at a rate that seemed reasonable, but the payment records told a different story. Over the past 18 months, the HOA had paid Greenscape Solutions almost double what the contract specified, with numerous additional services charges that weren't itemized. Even more interesting, the contract had been negotiated and signed solely by Patricia Burton, without a full board vote, which violated the HOA's own bylaws for contracts over $10,000 annually. I spent a weekend going through everything carefully, making notes and cross-referencing payments with board meeting minutes. The board minutes never mentioned most of these additional payments. Several of them had been approved as emergency maintenance, without specifying what the emergency was. On Monday, I called Marcus again. I think Patricia might be getting kickbacks from the landscaping company. We met at his office. I showed him everything I'd found. He went through it carefully, asking questions and making his own notes. "This is potentially fraud," Marcus said. "If she's approving unauthorized payments and getting kickbacks, that's a serious crime. But we need proof of the kickbacks. What you have here shows financial irregularities, but it doesn't directly prove corruption." "How do I get proof?" "That's tricky. You'd probably need to file a formal complaint with the other board members and see how they respond. If they investigate and find problems, great. If they don't, or if Patricia blocks the investigation, then you might need to involve law enforcement or file a civil suit." "This is getting way more complicated than some snow plow ruts," I said. Marcus smiled. "Welcome to HOA law. It starts with petty complaints and ends with discovering embezzlement. Happens more than you'd think." I decided to approach the other board members directly. I started with Brad, the little league coach, because he'd seemed reasonable at the hearing. We met at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. I showed him my documentation about the Greenscape Solutions payments. "This doesn't look right," Brad said, frowning at the numbers. "I don't remember us approving half of these. Patricia usually handles the landscaping stuff because she says she has experience with it from her old neighborhood." "Did you know she signed the original contract without a full board vote?" "No. That's supposed to go to a vote for anything over 10 grand annually." Brad leaned back in his chair. "Look, I joined the board because my wife wanted us to be involved in the community. I work 60 hours a week. I don't have time to dig into every detail, so I've been trusting Patricia to handle things. Obviously, that was a mistake. Can you request an audit of the finances? I can bring it up at the next board meeting, but Patricia's going to fight it. She fights everything that questions her authority." "What about Gerald and Cynthia?" "Gerald usually backs Patricia on everything. They're friends from way back. Cynthia might support an audit. Donna, I have no idea. She barely says anything at meetings." Brad agreed to request a financial review at the next board meeting. I continued documenting everything, including the ongoing violations Patricia kept sending me. I was up to 13 violation notices at this point, totaling over $3,000 in fines that I had no intention of paying. The next board meeting was scheduled for mid-April. I planned to attend but got a message the day before saying the meeting was canceled due to scheduling conflicts. A week later, I got an email saying the meeting would be held at a new time, in the middle of a weekday afternoon when most people would be at work. I rearranged my schedule and showed up anyway. The meeting was held in a small room at the community center. Only Patricia, Gerald, and Donna were present. Brad and Cynthia weren't there. "Where are the other board members?" I asked. "Brad resigned," Patricia said, not looking up from her papers. "Cynthia is on medical leave." "Resigned? I just talked to Brad last week. He submitted his resignation 3 days ago. Now, this meeting is for board members only. Residents can attend monthly meetings, but this is a special board session. The bylaws say all meetings except executive sessions must be open to homeowners," I pointed out. "This is an executive session," Patricia said. "Executive sessions have to be announced as such in advance and are only for specific purposes like legal matters or personnel issues." Patricia finally looked at me. "Mr. Richardson, you're not a board member. You need to leave." I stood my ground. "I'd like to know why Brad resigned and why Cynthia is suddenly on medical leave right before Brad was going to request a financial review." "That's none of your business. Now leave, or I'll call security." "Security? We don't have security." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." I decided this wasn't a battle worth fighting at that moment. I left but immediately called Brad. "Did you really resign?" I asked when he answered. "Hell no," Brad said. "What are you talking about?" I explained what Patricia had said at the meeting. "That's complete bullshit," Brad said, and I could hear the anger in his voice. "I never resigned, and I just talked to Cynthia yesterday. She's not on medical leave. She's perfectly fine. Patricia's lying. She said you submitted a resignation 3 days ago." "Owen, I'm telling you, I didn't resign from anything. This is fraud. She's forging resignations or something." I called Marcus immediately. This had gone way beyond HOA petness into actual criminal behavior. "If she's forging board resignations, that's fraud and potentially a bunch of other charges," Marcus said. "You need to document this. Get Brad to put his statement in writing. Contact Cynthia too. Then we need to file a complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office and possibly local law enforcement." Over the next few days, I worked with Brad and Cynthia to document everything. Brad sent me a sworn statement that he'd never resigned. Cynthia sent one saying she'd never requested medical leave and was being illegally excluded from board meetings. We also discovered that Patricia had sent emails to all homeowners from the HOA official email address announcing Brad's resignation and Cynthia's medical leave, and announcing 2 new board members who would be appointed to fill the vacancies. The new members were friends of Patricia's who didn't even live in the subdivision. That was the final straw. Marcus drafted a comprehensive complaint documenting everything: the harassment violations against me, the suspicious financial payments to Greenscape Solutions, the forged resignations, and the appointment of non-resident board members in violation of the bylaws. We filed the complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office, with Douglas County Law Enforcement, and we also filed a civil lawsuit on behalf of myself, Brad, and Cynthia against Patricia Burton and the HOA board for fraud, harassment, and breach of fiduciary duty. Things moved surprisingly fast after that. 2 investigators from the Attorney General's office showed up at the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center a week later and requested all HOA financial records. Patricia apparently tried to deny them access, but they had a warrant. I got a call from one of the investigators a few days later asking me to come in for an interview. I brought Marcus with me. The investigator, a woman named Detective Sarah Wilson, was professional but thorough. "Mr. Richardson, we've reviewed your complaint and the documentation you provided. We've also obtained the HOA's financial records and conducted interviews with other parties. I want to ask you some questions about your interactions with Miss Burton and your documentation of the landscaping damage. I spent 2 hours answering questions, walking through everything chronologically. Detective Wilson seemed particularly interested in the violation notices Patricia had sent me and the timing of them. It appears Miss Burton targeted you after you challenged her at the board hearing, Detective Wilson said. We found evidence that she did the same thing to at least 3 other homeowners over the past 2 years. One family ended up selling their house and moving because of the harassment. Can you tell me what you found about the financial stuff? I asked. I can tell you that we're investigating potential fraud and embezzlement. Miss Burton's conduct appears to have violated multiple statutes. That's all I can share right now, but you'll be notified as the investigation progresses. 2 weeks later, I was working at a job site wiring a new office building when Marcus called. Patricia Burton was arrested this morning, he said. Fraud, embezzlement, and forgery charges. The AG's office raided her house and found records showing she'd been getting kickbacks from Greenscape Solutions. Apparently, the owner of the company is her brother-in-law. I sat down on a stack of drywall. Her brother-in-law. Yep. She'd been approving inflated invoices and getting a percentage of the overcharges. They estimate she embezzled somewhere around $70,000 from the HOA over the past 2 years. Holy shit. It gets better. Gerald apparently knew about it. He's being charged as an accomplice. They found emails between him and Patricia discussing how to hide the payments. The news spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and practically every homeowner showed up. A lawyer representing the remaining legitimate board members explained that Patricia and Gerald had been removed and were facing criminal charges. The HOA would be conducting a full audit and implementing new financial controls. Brad was reinstated to the board and elected as the new president. Cynthia remained on the board, and 3 new members were properly elected by the homeowners. The civil lawsuit was settled relatively quickly. The HOA's insurance covered most of it. I received compensation for the harassment and my legal fees. The HOA also agreed to implement new policies about violation procedures to prevent future abuse. All of my violation fines were formally waived and expunged from my record. The HOA issued a formal apology, which Brad personally delivered to my house along with a bottle of decent whiskey. I'm sorry we didn't catch what Patricia was doing sooner, Brad said. A lot of us just trusted her because she seemed to know what she was doing. Turned out she knew exactly what she was doing, just nothing good. Greenscape Solutions went out of business after the investigation revealed their role in the fraud. The HOA hired a new landscaping company that actually did good work and charged reasonable rates. They spent a couple months fixing all the damage the previous company had caused, and by summer, the common areas actually looked nice. Patricia Burton's case went to trial in August. The evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, which amounted to over $70,000 plus interest and penalties. Gerald took a plea deal and got probation plus a fine in exchange for testifying against Patricia and cooperating with the restitution. My life in Meadowbrook Estates got a lot quieter after that. The new board was reasonable and focused on actual community maintenance rather than petty power trips. I never got another harassment violation notice. I still think about how the whole thing started, standing in my driveway that snowy morning, just trying to get to work. If Patricia hadn't decided to turn my snow removal into a power play, none of this would have come to light. She'd probably still be embezzling money and making people's lives miserable. Sometimes I drive through the neighborhood and look at the landscaping, which actually looks professional now. The irony isn't lost on me that the ruts she claimed I created in the snow that morning were completely imaginary, while the real damage she and her brother-in-law's company caused was extensive and costly. But that's exactly how people like Patricia operate, projecting their own failures onto others and using their authority to bully people into silence. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up to bullies, even when they have official titles and seem to have all the power. It taught me about the importance of documentation and knowing your rights. And it taught me that sometimes what starts as a petty dispute can uncover something much bigger and more serious. Several other homeowners thanked me over the following months for not backing down. One couple told me they'd been thinking about moving because of violations Patricia had been hitting them with about their fence. Another guy said he'd almost paid thousands in bogus fines before my case exposed the corruption. It felt good to know that fighting back had helped other people too. The local news even did a story about it, warning homeowners across Colorado to pay attention to their HOA finances and not to assume board members were acting in good faith just because they held positions of authority. A state legislator used the case as an example when proposing new laws to increase oversight of HOA boards and make it easier for homeowners to challenge abuse. Marcus told me that HOA fraud cases were more common than people realized, but most homeowners didn't fight back because the process seemed too daunting or expensive. You got lucky that Patricia escalated things enough to make it obvious she was corrupt, he said. A lot of embezzlers are smarter and stay under the radar longer. As for me, I still live in the same house in Meadowbrook Estates. My driveway gets plowed every time it snows, and nobody says a word about it. The landscaping looks great. My house numbers are apparently visible enough. My trash cans can sit out for a reasonable time without triggering a violation notice. Brad and I became friends through the whole ordeal. We get together for beers occasionally and laugh about the absurdity of how it all went down. His wife still gives him grief about getting involved with the HOA board in the first place. At least it's not boring, Brad says, and we actually do some good now. Fixed the pool, updated the playground, got the streets repaved. You know, actual useful stuff instead of harassing people about snow removal. Cynthia stayed on the board for another year before stepping down to focus on her business. The new board members have all been solid, focused on community improvement rather than power trips. I occasionally see Donna around the neighborhood. She never said much during any of the meetings, and it turned out she genuinely had no idea what Patricia and Gerald were doing. She was just a retiree who thought being on the board would be a nice way to stay involved with the community. After everything came out, she was horrified and resigned immediately, which was probably for the best. The whole experience made me much more aware of how HOAs work and how important it is for homeowners to pay attention. I read the meeting minutes now. I review the financial reports. I vote in elections for board members. It's easy to ignore that stuff when things seem fine, but that's exactly when corruption can take root. Patricia's house went up for sale while she was awaiting trial. Her husband divorced her, and apparently he'd had no idea what she was doing either. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids who seem nice. I helped them understand how the HOA works and gave them copies of all the bylaws and guidelines. I heard something crazy happened with the old HOA president, the new neighbor said when we first met. Yeah, you could say that, I replied. But it's better now. Just stay informed and don't be afraid to ask questions if something seems off. I think about that advice a lot. Don't be afraid to ask questions if something seems off. Such simple advice, but it's what the whole situation came down to. Patricia counted on people not asking questions, not pushing back, not documenting problems. She counted on people being intimidated by official-looking violation notices and scary fine structures. But when you actually stand up and demand accountability, when you document everything and know your rights, bullies like Patricia lose their power. They can't stand up to scrutiny because what they're doing won't hold up under examination. The landscaping damage that started this whole thing got completely fixed by the new contractor. The areas where Greenscape Solutions had caused ruts and damage are now beautifully maintained. The irrigation system was repaired properly. New plants were installed to replace the ones that had been killed. The entrance to the subdivision looks great, with healthy shrubs and properly maintained flower beds. Every time I drive past those areas, I remember taking all those photos back in the winter, documenting every instance of damage while Patricia was trying to find me for imaginary ruts in the snow. Those photos ended up being crucial evidence in the investigation. They showed a pattern of negligence and damage that contradicted Patricia's claims about caring for the community's appearance. The restitution money Patricia has to pay back is being used to fund improvements throughout the subdivision. The board set up a special fund specifically for that money, and homeowners get to vote on how it's spent. It's become a silver lining to the whole situation, turning embezzled funds into actual community benefits. My electrical contracting business actually got busier after the news story ran. Several people called me saying they liked how I'd stood up to corruption and wanted to support my business. I ended up hiring another electrician to help handle the increased work. Sometimes doing the right thing pays off in unexpected ways. The trial was interesting to watch, even though I wasn't there for most of it. Marcus went to several days of testimony and filled me in on the details. Patricia's defense tried to argue that the payments to Greenscape Solutions were legitimate and that she had authority to approve them. But the evidence was overwhelming, especially the emails between her and her brother-in-law discussing how much to inflate the invoices. One email that Marcus told me about was particularly damning. Patricia had written to her brother-in-law, "Make sure the damage looks worse than it is so we can bill for extra repairs. These idiots never actually check the work." That email alone probably sealed her conviction. The prosecutor argued that Patricia had betrayed the trust of every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates for personal financial gain. She'd used her position of authority to enrich herself while neglecting actual community needs. The pool that had been under repair for 6 months. Turns out there was nothing wrong with it. Patricia just didn't want to pay for pool maintenance because it cut into the money she could divert to Greenscape Solutions. The judge's comments during sentencing were pointed. He said that HOA board members hold positions of trust and responsibility, and that betraying that trust was particularly egregious. He noted that Patricia had not only stolen money, but had also harassed homeowners who questioned her authority, creating a toxic environment in the community. 4 years in prison seemed about right to me. It was enough to be a real consequence, but not so extreme as to be unfair. The restitution order was the part that really mattered. Patricia would be paying back that money for years, probably decades. Gerald's plea deal got him probation, but he also had to move out of Meadowbrook Estates as part of the settlement in the civil case. Last I heard, he and his wife relocated to Grand Junction, far away from the scene of his crimes. He lost his reputation and his community standing, which for someone like him was probably punishment enough. As the months went on and life returned to normal, I found myself reflecting on how a simple snow removal could trigger such a massive chain of events. It really showed how interconnected things are, and how standing up to one instance of unfairness can expose much larger problems. If I just paid that first fine, Patricia would still be in power. She'd still be embezzling money. She'd still be harassing other homeowners. The landscaping would still look terrible, with money being funneled to her brother-in-law's company for work they weren't really doing. But because I pushed back, because I documented everything, because I knew my rights and wasn't afraid to defend them, all of that corruption came to light. Sometimes, I wonder how many other HOAs out there have similar problems that nobody knows about because everyone's too intimidated to challenge the board. The new HOA board under Brad's leadership implemented a bunch of reforms. All contracts over $5,000 now require a full board vote with documented minutes. Financial records are posted online quarterly, so any homeowner can review them anytime. Violation notices have to include photographic evidence and specific guideline citations, and homeowners have a right to respond before any fines are assessed. Board meetings are recorded and posted online. These reforms make it much harder for one person to abuse their power like Patricia did. They create transparency and accountability. Several other HOAs in the area have adopted similar reforms after hearing about our situation. I still get asked about the whole situation fairly regularly. New homeowners hear the story and want details. I've become sort of a local expert on HOA rights and how to deal with board disputes. I don't mind talking about it. If my experience helps someone else stand up to unfair treatment, it's worth reliving the frustration of those violation notices. The funny thing is, I never wanted to be an HOA activist or whistleblower. I just wanted to clear my driveway and get to work. But sometimes life puts you in a position where you have to choose between rolling over and standing up turned out to be the right choice, even though it was harder. My ex-wife called me after the news story ran. We hadn't talked in over a year. She said she saw the story and was impressed that I'd fought back against the corruption. "I always knew you were stubborn," she said. "Nice to see you use it for something good." It was a weird conversation, but kind of nice. We'd ended on decent terms after the divorce, just two people who'd grown apart. Hearing from her reminded me that the person I'd become in the 3 years since buying the house was different from who I'd been during the marriage. More confident, more willing to stand up for myself, more aware of how systems work and how to navigate them. Would I do it all again if I could go back to that snowy morning? Absolutely. The months of stress and violation notices and legal meetings were worth it to expose Patricia's corruption and make Meadowbrook Estates a better place to live. Plus, I learned a lot about myself and what I'm capable of when pushed. These days, I still take photos of the landscaping sometimes, but now it's just to appreciate how nice it looks rather than to document damage. The new landscaping company does excellent work. The seasonal flowers are beautiful. The trees are healthy. The common areas are actually common areas again, places where people want to spend time rather than eyesores everyone ignores. The community itself feels different too. More engaged, more aware, more willing to participate in meetings and decisions. Adversity brought people together in a way that everything being fine never could. We went through something difficult as a community and came out stronger. I think about Patricia sometimes and wonder if she thinks about that snowy morning too. If she regrets choosing to harass me over imaginary ruts instead of just leaving me alone. If she regrets the embezzlement and the abuse of power. Probably not. People like her usually blame everyone else for their problems, but maybe prison gave her time to reflect. Brad joked once that I should run for the HOA board myself, but I declined. I'd rather stay a regular homeowner who pays attention and holds the board accountable. That's valuable too, and it's a role I'm comfortable with. The whole experience reinforced my belief in the importance of documentation. Those hundreds of photos I took of landscaping damage, the emails I saved, the notes I kept of every interaction with Patricia, all of it became crucial evidence. If I hadn't documented everything, it would have been my word against hers, and she had the authority of the HOA board behind her. Young people moving into HOAs need to understand this. Save everything. Take photos. Keep records. Know your rights under the bylaws and state law. Don't assume the board is acting in good faith just because they're supposed to. And don't be afraid to push back against unfair treatment. These lessons extend beyond HOAs too. Any situation where someone has authority over you, whether it's a boss, a landlord, a government agency, whatever. Documentation and knowledge of your rights are your best protection against abuse of power. As I write this, it's been almost a year since Patricia's arrest. The community is thriving. My house is still my house, with the same visible numbers and no imaginary violations. My driveway gets plowed every winter without incident. The landscaping throughout Meadowbrook Estates looks professional and well-maintained. Justice was served. The corrupt were held accountable. The system, despite its flaws, eventually worked. And it all started because I hired a snow plow and some petty tyrant decided to turn it into a power struggle. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. What seemed like a nightmare situation at the time ended up being one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I helped expose corruption, I helped reform a broken system, and I helped protect other homeowners from the kind of harassment I experienced. That's worth a lot more than avoiding some stress and violation notices. That's making a real difference in people's lives. And it all came from refusing to back down when someone with a title and a clipboard tried to bully me over some temporary impressions in the snow. So to anyone reading this who's dealing with an unreasonable HOA board or any other authority figure abusing their power, my advice is simple. Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to push back. Get help from lawyers or other experts when needed. And remember that bullies rely on people being too intimidated to challenge them. When you stand up with facts and determination, they usually crumble. The ruts Patricia claimed I created in the snow melted away within days, leaving no trace. But the real ruts, the damage she and her co-conspirators caused to our community through their greed and abuse of power, those took real work to fix. And fix them we did together, as a community that learned an important lesson about vigilance and accountability. Every time it snows now, and I hire a plow to clear my driveway, I smile a little. Nobody sends me violation notices anymore. The snow gets cleared, life goes on, and the community is better for having faced its demons and come out stronger. That's all you can really ask for.